Okay, so we just saw Day for Night. I hope that gave you a better idea of how to make a movie, or at least how you used to make a movie in 1978. Of course, a lot of the stuff that we saw in that film we can now do digitally on a computer. How exactly to do that, we are going to learn about next week. I will show you a documentary about how digital technology started changing cinema around 2010, 2011, 2012. The film is set in 2012, so of course it's not going to talk about things after that. So since it's a documentary, I should probably introduce what to pay attention to when watching a documentary. So the most common misconception about documentaries is that people think a documentary always tells the truth. No, it doesn't. A documentary shows you a set of facts. Hopefully, they're true. And even if they are true, the way that the facts are put together will change the message or the meaning of the film. So, there have been cases where two film crews made two different documentaries about the same topic, and the two films ended up being very different. Maybe one film thinks that this is a positive topic. The other film thinks that it is a negative topic, and they're making the film as a warning. So just because it's called a documentary does not mean that you should believe everything it says. Now, the way that a documentary will present its facts, there are a number of common ways that it will do that. Probably the most common way is they will find some experts or find people who know about the topic and will go interview them. Now, of course, when you hear the person say the thing, that seems to be more convincing, right? It's not like they have prepared their lines and they're just acting, right? They could be acting. Just because you have a real expert does not mean that the filmmaker will let this expert say whatever they want. Again, there are documentaries where the person is a real expert, the topic is a real thing, and the expert believes in what they're saying, but the words are written by the filmmakers for the expert to learn and to say on camera. And even if this is not the case, sometimes another way that a documentary will show you some facts is maybe the documentary is about some kind of activity. And so the film will show you that activity. But for most of those activities, most of the time, in a regular situation, there will not be a camera, right? If you make a documentary about teaching in college, usually there's no camera. So when the filmmakers come in and they put a camera in a classroom, it changes the situation. Think about the movie we just saw. There are long shots, there are close-ups, there are different angles. A documentary will also try to do that because it's more interesting. So if you have like a documentary crew making a film about this class, part of the time they will be set up in the back to get a big picture. Sometimes they will be shooting from the front to get your faces. Sometimes it will be a close up on the teacher or on one or two students. The filmmakers will move around the room. The camera, as you just saw, is really big. So if they want to put a camera over here, then these people will have to move. Right? So if you have a documentary recording some activity, yes, the activity probably does happen regularly, and the people doing the activity probably are the real people. But the specific situation that you are seeing on screen is not a natural situation, usually. Usually, in a documentary, they recreate that situation uh, to make it look more natural on camera. They have to do more artificial things in real life. That's often the case in art. Now, we're talking about visual things, but sometimes, or I guess in most documentaries, there will also be um, intercut images of what we call B-roll, which is images of other things. So, for example, maybe the filmmakers are interviewing someone, and then this person is describing a situation. So the film might try to recreate that situation to show you. Maybe they do use CGI. Maybe they hire actors to act out that situation. Usually in this case, you will still hear the expert talking on the voiceover, right? So the interview, we get a picture of the expert, and then we see something else, but the expert keeps talking. This is very familiar, right? What you may not have thought about is when you don't see the expert's mouth moving, when you cannot see their face, you also cannot trust the audio because there is such a thing as sound editing. You can take something that the expert said, you can cut it up, you can rearrange it, you can take out the empty pauses that we all have when we talk. Most filmmakers don't do this unless they have to. What do I mean when I say they have to rearrange the sound? Maybe the expert uh, forgot their lines or they got confused. Maybe they had a really long pause in the middle. Maybe the filmmakers later decided to save time and cut out one part of the subject. And so something that the expert said is no longer relevant to the film. In these kinds of situations, they would use sound editing to cut up and rearrange the soundtrack. So even though it is the expert talking and you are hearing the expert's voice, even what they say may have been altered by the filmmakers. In fact, this is probably the main reason why documentaries will use B-roll to show you other things, because they want to hide the fact that they have changed the interview soundtrack. This is actually more common than you might think. The next time you see a documentary, whether it's a real documentary or like you watch the TV news and they do like a report on like a restaurant or something, when you start off seeing the interview and then it cuts to B-roll, close your eyes and listen to the sound. Usually, it will not sound natural. It will sound like it's moving too fast, or maybe some phrases feel like they were taken from different parts. Usually, you don't notice this because, first of all, you probably never thought, why would they do this? Secondly, because our brains can only focus on one thing at a time. If you're focused on the imagery, you probably won't notice the details about the sounds. That's why I said you can close your eyes and pay attention to what you hear. So we have the interview, we have the reenactment. Sometimes you use the real people to act the situation. Sometimes you hire actors to act the situation. Sometimes you use CGI and just like do a CGI version of the situation. But then sometimes you have documentaries where the filmmaker is just really, really lucky. For most documentaries, what happens is the filmmaker hears about something interesting that might happen, or they know that somebody is doing something interesting. And so they pick up their cameras and they go follow this person, or they go to this place and see what's going on. Most documentaries, they already know what is happening or what could happen. So there is a kind of script. There's a kind of outline. They don't just walk in, they prepare. They think, okay, so this is the thing. How do we present it? How do we introduce it? What are the key highlights that we want to focus on? There is a plan. But sometimes filmmakers get really lucky and something completely unexpected happens in the middle of shooting. These are called fly on the wall documentaries because they're basically like you set up a camera and you capture exactly what's happening. Um, Later on, they will use editing to make it a better film, but the raw imagery, the footage that they capture is usually it's impossible to plan for. So one of my favorite documentaries is a film called Citizen 4, and it's about back in the late 2010s, an American secret agent named Edward Snowden revealed to the world how the US is spying on everybody through the spy agency, the National Security Agency, NSA. And they have this huge uh, location where they have computer servers that basically save every message that crosses the US border, whether it's an internet packet like emails, whether it is a phone call, it will save the metadata. So they don't have recordings, but they do know who's calling, who's receiving, what time, what day, how long. Basically, any information that crosses the US border, the US government has a database. And of course, this is pretty creepy, right? In fact, for example, everybody here uses Gmail because our school gives us a Gmail account. But in fact, Google saves everything. Every email you write, they save everything, even if you delete it. And because it's an American company, if the US government goes to a special court and asks the special judge to give them permission, then they can read your emails if they are related to what the government wants to know. Now, this is the subject of that documentary, but the form is really interesting because the filmmakers for that one, they got a random, the filmmakers are journalists, and there are two journalists, and one day they both received a very mysterious email. The person who later turned out to be Edward Snowden sent them an email saying, "Hi, I'm a secret agent for the U.S. government, and I think what the government is doing is wrong. I want to tell you what's going on. Meet me in Hong Kong." And so these two journalists, to be a journalist, you often have to follow leads, which means you're not sure what's going on, but it feels like something could happen. So they go fly from one is from Brazil, one is from the US. They both fly to Hong Kong, and they meet Snowden in a hotel room. They don't know what's going on, right? They just bring their cameras and they wait. And Snowden shows up and pulls up his laptop and shows them all of these secret government files and explains all of these secret government systems. And so you can imagine like the filmmakers were completely unprepared for how big a topic this actually was. And the news reports related to that kept on coming out for like a year, 2 years, 3 years. Edward Snowden today cannot go back to the US, as you might have imagined. He's currently living in Russia because Russia lets him live there and protects him from the US government. But of course, Russia doesn't let him do anything else. So he's kind of like a prisoner in Russia. So that's an example of a documentary where the filmmakers are just really lucky. They're not able to plan. They can only like pick up their camera and see what's going on. So yeah, that's documentaries. Questions? So again, just to remind you, hopefully the documentaries that you see in your life will be about real things, but most of them will not be 100% real. right? There will always be a little bit of artistry, fakery to make it seem like a better film. In fact, I remember watching one documentary about a wild cat in the Amazon. Really cute cat, really big and dangerous, but really cute. Uh, after the film ended, I was reading the credits, and I noticed there were credits for visual effects. If you remember, visual effects are after the film is over, you use a computer to change the image. That film did not have CGI. No scene had obvious uses of a computer, and yet they changed the image in some way that I could not tell, that most viewers probably could not tell. And so you can see that the goal of using VFX there is to make it look more real than it really was. Okay, so that's documentary. And then later on in the semester, we're going to watch an animation. So I should also talk a bit about animation, because animation, of course, is very different from a live action movie. Live action movie, you gather some people, you set up a scene, you set up a camera, action, uh, and then when they're done, cut, and then you edit things together. It's based on something that happens in real life. Animation is 100% fake. We can talk about animation in two different parts. Let's start from 2D animation, and then we'll move on to 3D animation. Does that make sense? No, let's start from 3D animation. 3D animation is it's the same concept as a live action film. The main difference is that the actors, the objects, the scenery, the camera, the lighting are all virtual. You all do that inside a computer. So they need some way to make the world of the film feel real in some sense. Now, of course, when you watch a 3D animation, you know it's not real. But the way that the digital characters move, the way that the objects move, the way that they fall, the way that the wind and the water move, the way that everything looks, has to feel uh, maybe realistic. At least it has to be consistent. It should not. If in one scene somebody's hair falls this way, the next scene the hair should not fall in a completely unexpected way, right? It has to be consistent, predictable. You only want to draw the audience attention to something you want them to notice. If you don't want them to think about, oh, how did they create this world? You should not make them notice it. You should not do something surprising. So how do 3D animators maintain consistency, maintain realism? They design a program that remembers how everything moves, how everything interacts. This is called an engine. If you play video games, you may have heard, oh, the latest edition of this video game uses a new animation engine or new physics engine. It's the same idea. It's a software package that tells the objects and people in this world how they should interact. And this is, in fact, the most exciting part of 3D animation technology. This is the part where 3D animators really like to try new things and create ever more detailed worlds and ever more detailed interactions. So, for example, the Disney film Tangled, I think Chinese was 魔法公主, 魔法奇缘, right? So the princess has really long hair, right? That was a completely new engine just to deal with the hair, right? If for a regular 3D character, they have a regular amount of hair. You don't need the computer to deal with everything at the same time. But if your character has 10 times the length of hair, that means your computer has to deal with 10 times the amount of hair physics. How to separate the hair, how detailed do you want it to be, how do the different hairs interact with each other, how do each part of the hair interact with the world. It gets very complicated. So that film was important for 3D animation because it had to deal with this hair. Same thing for like Avatar, right? The whole thing is set underwater. And so they also had to invent a new physics engine to deal with that. Even a film where you might think it's not nothing special, like you guys know the series Hotel Transylvania? So it's like Dracula and his family run a hotel or something. Yeah. So Hotel Transylvania 3, where I think they go on a cruise ship. I didn't see it. I don't. I'm not interested. But anyway, I think they go on a cruise ship. That film also was very innovative in its technology. It doesn't look real. It looks like it's made for children. But on the cruise ship, there's a dance scene and there's a dance off. Different characters compete to see who can dance the best. And so they had to invent a new physics engine or update a previous physics engine to deal with uh, how the characters' bodies are able to move in a very fluid and fast way that doesn't go against physics. And they had to apply this technology not just to humans, but also to monsters and also to like animals. And so that film is also very famous in animation circles for animators, even though the film itself was, but the technology was really good. So once you have designed your world and how things are supposed to interact, then you can build the characters. You design like a space. You put the characters there, and then you also have to choose where do you put the camera, how do you do the lights, how long should each shot be, just like a live action film, except it's all inside the computer. And I guess it's less likely for the characters to screw up because it's all designed. Um, but then the process is very similar to a live action film. You shoot everything, you check everything's fine, you edit things together, add music, etc. So that's 3D animation. 2D animation is very different. Before computers, what they did was think of a 2D animated scene. Character, close background, far background, far background, like the sky or whatever. There are different layers. Some layers need to move a lot, like the characters. Some layers move a little bit, like the medium background, maybe like you see some grass or tree leaves blowing. And then some things should not move at all. Buildings, the sky, things like that. So for each different level of movement, the animators would draw a layer, would draw a picture. And so you would have like 4, 5, 12 pictures. They would be drawn on glass. And then they have a contraption where you put the glass in and it stacks up and you climb a really tall ladder and you use a camera to shoot from the top down. And so you only need to change the glass or change the image between the glass when that image needs to move. So that's why if you watch some old, really cheap cartoons, you will notice that the characters, they try to reduce movement, as little movement as possible. So if a character is talking, their body will not move at all. It's just their mouth. Or if they're pointing at something, only their hand will move and nothing else will move. Because the more movement there is, the more work they have to do. So this process is now digital also. You don't have to really like put things between glass and shoot them all at once. Um, you can do that on a computer, but the process is still the same. You have digital layers, and then you also have to adjust the movements of each moving thing. Now, so when we talk about this kind of movement, it becomes very interesting. It's the logic is strangely the same as a live action film also. We previously mentioned that a film usually is replayed at 24 frames per second, which means every second it changes 24 images. If you want the film to slow down, add more images. I know English majors don't have very good math, but think about this. If you add more, okay, so let's say in order to get from A to B, you have 100 images. That's a bad example. From A to B, you have 240 images. 24 frames per second, that's 100 seconds. But if in those 100 seconds, you now have 480 images, you have added extra images, you will not get from A to B. You will only get from A to halfway. So the film has slowed down. Does that make sense? So if you want to slow down a movie, add more images. If you want to make things go faster, take images out. That's the exact thing that happens in 2D animation. If you want a character to walk, use a certain number of images. If you want them to jump or run, use fewer images. If you want them to slow down, add more images. If it's live action, uh, you would have to change the camera speed to change how many images you capture. But if it's 2D animation, you can just draw more images in the middle, or you can take out extra images to control the speed of the action. Okay, I'm thinking if I forgot anything. Oh, yes. So in both cases, you will then have to hire a voice actor, right, to add the dialogue. And so the process is actually, again, very similar to live action film, where they have to go into a studio, look at what they had previously done, and say the lines exactly the same again to make sure that it looks like they are actually talking on the scene. For an animation, it goes two ways because you can change the image also. So you have a very general image. You have characters moving around, but maybe like the face is not finished. Maybe the mouth movements are not finished. And so the actors have a little more flexibility to deliver their lines, to really do voice acting. And once the director has chosen the voice takes that they want and edited them together, then the animators can go back and match the mouth movements to the dialogue. Um, so for this reason, in some cases, the character might look a little bit like the voice actor because everybody moves their mouths in a different way. So if you really want to make your character convincing, maybe you want to make sure that the character moves their mouth in a similar way to the voice actor. So that's 2D animation. And then there's also a type of animation called claymation, where they use clay, they make clay models. The most famous one, I guess, is Shaun the Sheep or like Wallace and Gromit. You guys know this? It's Shaun the Sheep. It's a really cute film series. It's a British claymation series. Like it's a little sheep, uh, and it belongs to a farmer, but the farmer treats this little sheep as a pet, not as an animal, and so they get into lots of adventures together. The sheep is really cute. Anyway, so this is claymation. They use clay to create the characters, to create the entire environment, and then they put a real camera somewhere and take a picture, and then they adjust the characters just a little bit, and they take another picture, and they adjust a little bit again, and then they take another picture. And if you like take those hundreds and thousands of pictures and you string them together, you get an animation. So it's this is a kind of animation it's really hard to use a computer to do because clay If you use CGI clay, it just looks fake. There's a special way that the light kind of shines on the clay, the way that you can tell it's a real material, that it's hard to use a computer to fake. Um, but I have heard that I think the latest Wallace and Gromit film is their last one because they use a special kind of clay, and the only factory that makes that clay has shut down. So I think the latest one came out late last year, early this year. Uh, Probably the last one in the series. Very sad. So you can see that animation takes a lot of work. And so for a modern animated film, if you read the credits, there will be walls of names, just entire blocks of names, because it takes a lot of people. Um, yeah, so later in the semester when we watch an animation, you can think about that. Like, why did they choose to put the camera in this place? Or which layers are they emphasizing? What are we supposed to look at? How did they do the sound? These kinds of questions. Similar to live action, but we may need to think about them in a slightly different way. Okay, questions? All right, next week, come and watch the documentary. If you still need a handout, I have copies here. See you next week.